So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to a variation on a map that we have seen before. Now, I don't know what the official name of this map actually is, but it is the Harad inspired map that is on the sea, or Harad/Umbar inspired map, which is near the sea. The lighthouse on the island is just out there, and the de facto final stand actually is towards the front of the defence, weirdly enough, because of how it is laid out and how the hills work. But this one has been changed around a little bit by Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Cloud, so I'm sure you can see the extra bridge which is moving across there, which will make this side of the map certainly a little bit less choke pointy than it was previously, which was a little bit of a concern, but on this occasion that will not be the case. It's also looking a little bit more green and lush on the map now, rather than the barren scrubland that we saw going off into the horizon on that way. And also we have a lot of the black ships out here on the sea as well, just to give it a little bit of extra flavour. But yes, going to be a few differences in terms of the pathways that certainly the attacking armies can take. The defenders are going to be playing out the battle more or less in the same way that we've seen previously, only they're going to have to deal with a few differences in how the defence is actually structured. And I believe it is a themed battle as well, with a combination of Umbar and Harad on the defence, and a combination of TOL, Amroth and Gondor on the attack, so it's certainly very thematic from that perspective. Speaking of which, let's start off with the attacking armies, shall we, with Loremaster Eothad. Now there's a name I haven't seen in quite a while. Playing as TOL Amroth, got some upgraded Doran archers on the front. You would imagine that the attackers should have the skirmish advantage. I mean, Umbar probably the best in terms of heavy archers, trading back and forth between heavy archers anyway, of all four factions on the field, but Harad, certainly that isn't really their style at all, so I'd imagine on average we'd see the Gondorians and TOL Amrothians have a bit of an edge there. The armour upgrade on the Doran archers regardless is going to be useful for them, and as we have seen in the past, both recently and further back in time as well, if you're on the attack, if you can use your archers well and efficiently, it just makes the defender's job that much more difficult. But in a 4v4, it's not the be-all and end-all to be able to do that as the attackers. You do have to do other things well in addition to that. A Thalond men-at-arms with the armour upgrade as well. They're sturdy, they're dependable, but they're certainly not what you would call a tour de force in terms of heavier infantry. Certainly, again, that's more the realm of their Gondorian allies, and especially the Umbaran on the other side as well. But they will make a decent enough front line to cover some of their more damaging and impressive units. Belfast Marines, throwing projectiles when you're on the attack or the defence in a siege are always going to be useful, both for breaking open a front line as the attackers, or for blunting a significant enemy assault if you're on the defence. Belfast Marines, there's nothing too special about them. Half decent in melee as auxiliary troops, but yeah, it's going to be one of those units, I think, that they're not going to be the difference maker, but they can certainly be a difference maker for the attackers. It is worth saying before we move on as well, this is a work in progress. Apparently Eclipse is going to be making some more changes to this as time goes on. A Thalond Halberdier is going to be useful certainly against the Umbar forces. Umbar may have better standard heavy infantry than TOL Amroth, but one way in which you can certainly equalise that fight a little bit is by deploying a good amount of armour piercing, and the Thalond Halberdiers are one such example of a unit like that. Tirithea Marksman, the heavier TOL Amroth archer, again going to be putting a little bit of extra emphasis on that skirmish play that the attackers will probably be trying to engage in, at least somewhat. A couple of units of Doran pikemen, the extra range, the armour upgrade as well. Interesting to see how and when they get used. Obviously pole arms certainly the purview of their Gondorian allies as well. We'll see how the Doran pikemen get along. 2 units of the Haven Guard is a big investment, but seeing as this is a 4v4, that means the individual attacking armies are actually going to be the ones that are of higher quality, so stuff like the Haven Guard will be really useful, especially against the more lightly armoured Haradrim. That full damage that they can deal is not going to be blunted by any sort of armour, but even against the Umbar troops, they're such a high quality unit that Umbar won't be relishing the thought of facing them either. And then intermittently we have Black Swan Renegades and Perithil Champions. Perithil Champions may not be as impressive as the Haven Guard in front and behind them, but they're still a fear-causing heavy swordsman unit that are capable of dishing out a lot of good base damage, and the Black Swan Renegades, of course, have got the armour piercing that maces offer as well. A bit more a defensive unit in general, though. Moving on to the second attacking army, we have Wojciech, who has got some upgraded Gondor spearmen. Certainly damage isn't going to be the aim of the game with this kind of unit. They're going to be there to keep the attack going and keep grinding against the enemy infantry for as long as they possibly can, I should say. And yeah, the Gondor spearmen will be able to do that, especially with both levels of armour upgrade. They're going to be a very sturdy unit, but again, not going to be particularly damaging, especially not against the Umbar heavy infantry, and they'll also be particularly vulnerable to stuff like the Harad armour piercing. This is where a unit like the Citadel Guard can come into play though. They'll still be vulnerable to armour piercing of course, but they themselves have got armour piercing as well as all the defensive accoutrements that you would expect from a spear unit of the high value that the Citadel Guard come with, so they're going to be pretty good against the forces that Umbar can deploy especially. Just in behind, some fully upgraded Gondor infantry as well. Kind of a similar story with them as it is with the Athalon men-at-arms that we saw from Dol Amroth, only they have 2 levels of armour upgrade they can go into rather than just 1, and they're cheaper to upgrade to that point as well. So the Gondor infantry overall are going to be a slightly more efficient version of this kind of infantry unit than their cousins from Dol Amroth. Makes a bit of a difference, not a huge difference, but that sort of thing can add up when you apply it to multiple armies. Marksmen of Caer Andros, heavy archers once again, decent investment into them. Veterans of Osgiliath, more defensive units, and also some standard Gondor archers. So the attackers here, in general, are going to be trying to play to this strength of theirs, but it'll be interesting to see whether they can override the defensive prowess that Umbar have in this particular regard as well. Axemen of Lasarnak, speaking of Umbar, again, that's more armour piercing that they're going to be worried about. But the Axemen of Lasarnak are, of course, significantly less defensively savvy than the Citadel Guard in front of them. Speaking of which, we also have the Raven Helms, who are another unit of heavy swordsmen. So they're going to be better at dealing that base damage, but they don't have the armour piercing that their axemen to the side can also deal. Fountain Guard, another armour piercing unit, can be really, really good in a fight when it's more structured and regimented. Fountain Guard are obviously going to be one of those targets, however, that defensive skirmishers are going to try to deal with at the very least. If they're still around in the late game though, that could prove to be a real problem for the defenders. Pelagia Marines, very similar to the Belfast Marines that we've already seen, only they come with a short sword rather than a hand axe. Mithrandir's Retinue is an interesting inclusion. They're a multiple HP lance unit. I mean, there are more open areas within the settlement that could potentially be taken advantage of by a unit such as this, especially considering they are hardier than most units of cavalry of this type. But there's going to be a narrow window of opportunity to utilise them, and at the back some Wardens of the White Tower. Fairly typical as far as an infantry unit like this goes, certainly not on the level of, certainly not as impressive as something like the Haven Guard that we saw from Eothad's army, but nonetheless, still a very good unit at the high end. Now then, a Numenor army, which is interesting, from DF Morris. I didn't realise they were on the field today, bringing a trebuchet, so this artillery piece can be very, very effective if it's used at the right time, but I'd be surprised if the defenders didn't have some artillery that they would try to snipe this artillery piece out with. Belagaer archers are here, Numenorian steel bows, so you have the lower end but more skirmishy focused archer, and then you have the Numenorian steel bows who are going to be hunting down high value targets with their limited but very effective armour piercing ammunition. Numenor Royal Guard, of course, a singular heavy archer that Numenor can bring. Seafarers of Lindamos, as far as a javelin unit goes, they're both more impressive at range, albeit with less ammunition than the 2 javelin units from their allies on the battlefield today. But they're also going to be more impressive in melee, more genuine medium infantry in melee than the 2 units that we've already seen. Numenorian Shield Guard, very similar to the Citadel Guard from Gondor that we've seen as well, only I actually believe the Citadel Guard is superior, interestingly enough, but they do much the same thing, and the differences between the 2 units are rather negligible. In a real battle situation, 2 units of Belagaer pikemen to shore things up. Several units of Numenorian cohort. This is the kind of unit which the defenders will be worried about because of the quality they can bring. And considering that Numenor will have more money to play with than the equivalent defensive armies, they're going to be able to lean into their quality a bit more. Numenor Iron Sentinels, a real menace in the late game, even earlier on actually as far as pikes go because of their shields and heavy armour. They are a little bit more difficult to deal with for just your basic run-of-the-mill archers, but I'm sure the defenders will have other things in store for them. Pharazim Swordmaster is quite possibly the strongest unit of infantry in the game, depending on what your criteria is. 3 HP heavy swordsman. And finally some Pharazim Nobles as well. A bit more of a defensive cavalry unit than the Mithrandir's Retinue, but perhaps a little bit more universally useful depending upon what the defenders want to do. And last but not least, we have a second Numenor army, actually, interestingly enough, this one from the Womb Raider. He's got some Numenorian steel bows, some Belagair archers through the trees, a second unit of Pharazim nobles. We've got some Numenorian cohorts and shield guard here at the back, the core of most Numenor armies. Seafarers of Nindamos as well, a fantastic supporting tool, and then Belagair units in front. More pikes, and also padding out the army with a few units of basic spears as well. Very similar sort of story here as it is with any other basic human spear unit from the Western Kingdoms. Good in terms of their ability to stay alive and their defensive values, but they're not going to be the most damaging against other infantry units, so that is worth bearing in mind. Better as a combined assault as a unit. Now then, moving on to the defenders, starting off with an Umbar army under the command of Tundra's Fox. They're going to be facing off against their Numenor brethren across the other side of the field. Very similar in terms of style and focuses, really, although I actually think Numenor are a little bit more singular in their focuses, whereas Umbar have got a few more feathers to their cap, albeit they do sacrifice a bit of their infantry power to get there. Harbingers of Castamere, for example, are not on the same level as the Pharazim Swordmasters. Rather, that model looks more high definition than it used to. I don't know whether I'm just seeing things. Corsair crossbowmen and infantry here on the defence, so ranged units are going to be one way in which Umbar are going to need to leverage some power. They can't go blow for blow with singular Numenor armies that are of individually higher quality than theirs, so they're going to need to utilise crossbows and their javelins from the Black Guards in here as well. Elsewhere, what have we got? More Black Guards, more infantry, more crossbows, which is a wise pick. Plenty of pikes, plenty of Belagair units in general. Corsair fencers, again more missile units, so not too surprising I think to see Tundra's Fox take this approach. There's Balakith shield bearers in there as well for the armour piercing to try and equalise matters somewhat. And then way back over here there is actually another unit of Corsair fencers being concealed way back here, perhaps to be used later on when the attackers are climbing and scaling the hill that leads up to the central keep. Moving on, we have another, actually no, this is just Tundra's Trebuchet, but then moving on we have a Harad army under the command of Lango. He has got several units of Trollmen, as you would expect in this situation in Champions of Nathrat. This kind of armour-piercing punch is the best tool that Harad can bring to the table for their allies in a situation like this, and it will be universally useful against all four attacking armies today. Southron archers here as well, just to provide a little bit of skirmish support, but this is where Harad are sorely outclassed by both their allies and their enemies in this kind of battle. The Serpent's Fangs, if he has brought a unit of them, will do okay, but the rest of Harad's archer lineup is really just there to soak up damage. Where they do quite well at range, however, is of course in their javelins. Muhard Beast Hunters are going to be able to do a decent amount of damage. They're also armour piercing in melee, but they're obviously very weak in melee in terms of taking damage, so more of a desperation thing than anything else later on. We may see that utilised. Several units of Southron Pikes, Southron Warband here as well, so very basic units, but all of them have armour piercing once again. Upgraded Serpent Guard will offer a bit more quality to the front line and a little bit more defensive prowess as well in terms of their melee defense. Muhard Warriors and Berserkers as well, so plenty of Muhards on the field, but you can see here that obviously individually these armies are not going to be as strong as those that they're facing off against, but I would be very surprised if stuff like the Hashari wasn't being utilised as well. Now then, moving on, we have another Harad army played by Cad Bane BanditCamp.com. That is a very long-winded name, so we'll just be calling him Cad from now on. 2 units of Trollmen once again, some Muhard Beast Hunters in behind. We've got the Demons of the Desert, which could be one of the most devastating units on the field if they're used correctly, and of course when they're on the defence like this, they're a little bit more difficult to deal with than when they're on the attack, because when they reveal themselves and you're on the attack, invariably the defenders are going to focus them down. Not so easy to do in a situation like this though. If they're utilised at the right moment, they can be real difference makers. Champions of Nathrat in behind them. There is some cavalry on the defence as well, some Muhard Beast Masters. Javelin cavalry that's got a bonus against other cavalry in melee could be useful for warding off the very high value cavalry that the attackers have brought with them today, but they're going to have to be quite savvy with how they utilise this unit. And then in behind, several units of Southron Warband once again, and some Haradrim Spearmen and Pikes. So again, the very low tier and then low to mid tier units that Harad can bring to pad out their army. And there is a catapult in there as well, so a bit of defensive artillery, which is not too surprising to see. And last, but by no means least, we will have the player who sent me the battle replay today, which is of course Eclipse 2500, who is also the one who made the changes to the map, I believe. Playing as Umbar, Corsair Infantry without the armour upgrade this time, Belagair Footman, At the back, more Belagair archers, there's some shield bearers in there also. Alcarondas Legion to add a little bit of much needed quality to the centre of this defence. Corsair crossbows, again going to be a very important unit for the defenders if they hope to be victorious in this battle, I think. Numenor Sentinels, which again, another very good unit to base your defence around, a nice solid core. Corsair infantry, Belagair footmen, and I'm sure in one of the Umbar armies there's probably going to be stuff like Castamir's Rangers that we have yet to see, or perhaps buried in and amongst the huge massive units there in the middle. Obviously it should go without saying that I'm going to make a bit of a cut, because I think the defenders are going to be moving their defence around a little bit, and the attackers are fairly far away anyway, so I wouldn't imagine this is going to be a lightning quick start to this battle, especially seeing as it's 65,000 frames long. That is rather lengthy, but we shall have to wait and see on that count. But yeah, I'll make a cut and we'll rejoin when the battle is about to get underway. So, through the trees, artillery fire is how we're actually going to be starting this off, and that took me somewhat by surprise. Just a trebuchet volley from far distance in the heart of the defence, hitting the Numenor army, so this is how things are going to kick off by the looks of things. And I do actually think that the Numenorians probably have the most unenviable of the tasks here, because while there are two ways into the settlement from this side now, they're both rather narrow bridges. So, if the defenders set themselves up appropriately, they should be able to hold them at bay without too many issues moving forward. There are of course plenty of artillery pieces on the attack as well. Not entirely sure what they were hoping to accomplish by sending this one unit of Harad spearmen so far forward, and Wojciech's Gondor infantry with that armour upgrade going to be exactly the sort of unit which is able to very efficiently deal with basic Harad spears like this. Any sign of any support forthcoming? It does not look like it. I think there's a distinct possibility for the Haradrim spearmen. To absolutely no one's surprise. I mean, Gondor infantry, human men-at-arms units like this tend to be very functional in what they do. They don't tend to be able to rack up a huge kill count unless they're going up against units such as this. Now, a lot of the other Harad units will be very good against this kind of Gondor infantry unit. Plenty of armour piercing that Harad have at their disposal. Interesting to see not a huge amount of skirmishing going on between the two banks of archers at the moment, just some artillery fire on the other side and a 1v1 infantry engagement happening near to the choke point that the defenders are going to try and be holding on this side. Surely that's not going to last too much longer with the Numenor Royal Guard and Belagair archers of both the attackers and the defenders, being that it is going to be a Numenor versus Umbar affair, both menacing one another with their presence. Also the Numenorian steel bows here, which interesting to see them so close to the front line. I mean, is there anything they can really go after and be effective? I would doubt it. I doubt they're going to have their very best units on the front line, maybe close enough to reinforce, so it's not the worst idea to have them close by, but I would be questioning using them so early on. Belagair archers pushing forward, still not too much activity over here outside of the pot shots that the trebuchet from Tundra's Fox's Umbar army took earlier on. Meanwhile, Cad Bane's spears suffering the fate that we thought they would. A few of the Gondor infantrymen are bloodied, but little else. The armour will be enough for them to weather the little damage that the Haradrim spearmen are able to chuck out. Interesting that these banners are bloodied despite being held aloft so high. And yeah, defeat seems easy enough for them. Also, actually going to be utilising the bridge down here, which is something we've seen neglected by many in this on this map before. And I'm glad to see that Eothad is not doing that. He is going to be sending across an expeditionary force of 1,000 men-at-arms. Now, the defenders are defending this angle for now, but if the attackers completely neglected that bridge right from the start, then of course they would be able to bank up entirely on this one choke point, which would be pretty tough for the attackers. Now we can see the first volleys coming in, just on basic Harad spears, so the defenders won't be too concerned about that sort of thing. Having said that, numbers will count for the defenders. It is a 4v4 after all, so they are going to need to rely upon more numerous units like this, because individually their armies are going to be of lower quality than that of the attackers. So if it comes down to a fight of even numbers, you would not fancy the defenders' chances unless they were able to set up a very nice defensive position indeed. Belagair pikemen Balakith Shield Bearers moving down here as well. They may be without the armour upgrade, but they're still going to be able to defeat stuff like basic Athalan Manatars because of the armour piercing that they bring to the table. Both sides, interestingly enough, when a fight erupts down here in this little section of lower terrain, are going to be able to use their own skirmishers up on the high ground to pretty good effect, and I think that's what Eothad is going to be doing immediately with his Doran Ernal archers shooting into the Balakith Shield Bearers. Now the clue is in the name. If their shields are pointing in the right direction, they will be able to absorb a decent amount of the damage that those arrows are going to be doing, but if they do push forward, I don't think their shield value will actually be coming into effect because they'll be getting hit from the side. So yeah, you can see the Balakith Shield Bearers, they're winded actually, but they are going to get into a more defensive shape, showing their back to the archers. That would have been a good opportunity actually to loose another volley or two. Meanwhile, Numenorian cohorts crossing the bridge. I mean, the Balagai footmen are going to be there to block their advance, but they're going to do little else. Much like on the other side, the discrepancy in terms of quality between the basic spears and the units of sword infantry they're facing off against is fairly vast, armour upgrade or no. And the Numenorian cohort's damage is far in excess of that the Gondor infantry over on the other side of the battlefield can kick out. Our shield bearers just in behind though. A combination of the two units in terms of numbers, a little bit of extra armour piercing, maybe that would be enough. Defeat seems certain, that's a little bit surprising. I mean, that will turn around of course without any sort of support, but with the close proximity of those shield bearers we shall see. Balakith units after all are the unique element that the Umbar army has in comparison to Numenor really. Got that entire tier of, not quite mid-tier but not quite high-tier infantry units. Equipped with all that AP. Both colour variants of the Balagai footmen staring at one another with malicious intent, but so far nothing's come of this. Looks like Umbar are actually the ones to maybe kick the skirmishing off. They're going after the Ardenheim shadow bows in the background. Now of course they do have good armour for rangers, so as long as they get out of harm's way quickly that won't be too much of a problem. I mean, once again, both the attackers and the defenders will actually have a good opportunity to shoot into these choke points as they erupt on the front line. So trying to keep rangers off the front line from both sides' perspective is going to be very, very important, because if someone can get rangers into a position to shoot into a very narrow choke point such as this bridge, it's going to be very, very painful. You are going to see the spears clash with one another. Again, a bit of a wet noodle contest this, because Balagai footmen are not the most damaging spears, although you would give the edge to the Umbar spears on this occasion because they do have that armour upgrade, so they are going to be the ones, at least 1v1, to be better on this occasion. But of course the Numenorian cohort shifts that balance of power so far in the favour of Numenor it's not even funny. Balagai archers up on the high ground there for Numenor, perhaps trying to shoot into this front line. So far the Balakith Shield Bearers are not engaging with the Numenorian cohort, instead leaving the Balagai footmen to their own devices. Which is somewhat surprising, especially seeing as even if they do engage on the front line and they end up attracting the attention of the arrow fire, the Balakith Shield Bearers do have that good shield value, and with the armour upgrade as well, wouldn't be the worst idea I don't think. Similar story over here, maybe they're just trying to blunt the initial Numenorian attack and slow it down before really engaging their skirmishers and their better infantry units here, the Umbar forces. They've of course got the close support perhaps of the armour piercing of the Harad as well, Southmont warband though they may be. Still the sort of thing that can add up over time. Balakith Shield Bearers moving forward to engage on the front line now as well. From Eclipse 2500, this is a unit which will be much, much better at dealing with the Gondor infantry, which is leading the charge over on this side. They have taken a little bit of damage, but I would assume that they've also attracted a little bit more attention from the attacking skirmishers just because they are a more serious infantry unit than the Harad spearmen that came before them. But interestingly, Umbar are the ones leading the defence from the start for the most part. Harad going to be settling into maybe a bit more of a supporting role, which, considering their lower level of survivability, maybe that's not all that surprising. Defeat seems certain, only a military genius could win this battle. That's a little bit surprising, but then again, they are outnumbered slightly. You'd still back them because of that armour piercing. I mean, this really is the only kind of fight that the Balakith Shield Bearers are going to be really efficient in. For the most part, the Alcarondas Legion are going to be the better choice. The Balakith Shield Bearers are cheaper, however, so if you're going up against a unit which you know isn't going to be able to deal as much damage as they would like to in response to you, and is very, very reliant on their armour, such as the Gondor infantry, this is where the Balakith Shield Bearers can shine, and you can see the armour piercing is now having an effect. They are taking damage in response, though. Meanwhile, Dol Amroth are pushing forward a little bit more. Not a huge amount of range support for now. So of course, our infantry here, Alcarondas Legion and Balakith Shield Bearers guarding the front line, so both units of Umbar heavy infantry, also some Belagae pikemen, I should say, not Balakith pikemen, that would be an interesting unit there. Plenty of Athalon men-at-arms. Clear projectiles is that. Yeah, Hashari Stalkers revealing themselves and going after the Athalon Halberdiers. I mean, the Athalon Halberdiers are one way in which Dol Amroth can make Umbar's infantry a little bit more uncomfortable. For the most part, Umbar are significantly stronger in terms of the infantry they can field. Dol Amroth are not weak, but Umbar, for them, it's their main faction focus. Halberds, however, with their armour piercing and their ability to hold units a little bit further away from them, can be exactly the sort of thing to help deal with Alcarondas Legion and the like. But Umbar, of course, are already going to be responding to that with pikemen, which are a good way to deal with halberds, and of course they're shooting the halberds as well with their ranged support. Belfalas Marines, I mean, this is the most full-blooded engagement we've seen so far on the field. Dol Amroth going in hard, and Umbar having to respond to them in kind. Some javelins hitting centre mass there of the Alcarondas Legion, and the support also of the Doran Ernal archers in the background should not go unnoticed either. Neither side is going to come out of this looking all that pretty, but of course as the attackers perhaps they can afford to take this more aggressive tactic. Not quite as much as they'd be able to in a 5v3, but they're going to be hoping their extra quality, all of the armour upgrades they've equipped their units with, are going to be enough to help them weather this storm, and then their own range support can come in also and do the business. Need a little bit more range support from their allies here, I think. Well, Gondor Spearmen moving in. The Balakith Shield Bearers trying to move back to the support of some other infantry units. I mean, they're very depleted at this point, so it didn't work out as well as maybe they were hoping, but there is a unit of Belagae footmen on hand to help stop the renewed assault of Gondor, who are taking a little bit more caution with it than Dol Amroth, but they are still pushing forward and letting the defenders know that they can't afford to sleep on the Gondorians. Gondor Spearmen moving forward. I mean, with their both levels of armour upgrades, you would say they are a superior unit to the Belagae footmen. I think they actually do more damage as well at the base, not by much, but these things do add up when you're talking about the Gondorians. I mean, if they, I think it's 4 damage in comparison to the 3 that the Belagae footmen do, but that's still, relatively speaking, a high percentage jump, even if neither of them are going to be all that good at dealing damage in the long run. Seafarers of Nindamos, looks as though they've tried to move forward and use their javelins. I mean, they must have been successful because they're pushing in now. Looks as though there's been a fairly hefty shift in proceedings over here. I mean, the Belagae footmen are still alive, but only just. Those Numenorian cohorts have been whittled down, which must have come surely at the result of some range support. Seafarers of Nindamos are also a little bit depleted. Victory seems certain. I mean, going back over here, this Dol Amroth push is still the most interesting aspect of the battle so far. Plenty of these Athalon men-at-arms. Says defeat seems certain. I mean, the relative quality in comparison to the Alcarondas Legion is still in question. I mean, the Athalon men-at-arms, when you upgrade their armour, I think they're another unit that look a lot more impressive than maybe they actually are. Just because they look as though they could actually be able to go toe-to-toe visually with something like the Alcarondas Legion with the heavy armour, the big shields, but that is of course not the case. Plenty of arrow fire coming in support now, showering the second unit of Athalon Halberdiers that is being committed forward by Lawmaster Eothad. Javelins coming in, hitting the unit of supporting infantry that's now being added, the Southron Warband, of course, that little bit of our AP, going to be useful for trying to puncture through the plate armour. Belfalas Marines, Doran Ernal archers firing down. Athalon Halberdiers did take damage on the approach, but they did still manage to get into melee with over 100 men in the unit, and this means there's still going to need to be more infantry added to keep Dol Amroth contained, you would suggest. Meanwhile, still this unit of Belagae footmen holds on. I mean, surely without any sort of support, the Seafarers of Damos will finally be able to defeat all of these spearmen. Further afield, we have Belagaya pikemen. Maybe a little bit more attention being brought onto this bridge defence over here, purely because the defenders have committed a little bit more here with pikes in addition to the footmen in the very close proximity of the Muhard warriors should their numbers be required. Also don't suffer from that spear malus, so they will actually be able to chuck out a little bit more damage in response, even if the Numenorians will tear through a unit that's as lightly armoured as the Muhards. Not really armoured at all as such. Light infantry indeed. Belagaya footmen on the march forwards. Numenor Iron Guard also in close proximity, ready to support. I mean, it's been interesting here. They've definitely been committing units to the fight, both sides, but you get the sense that they're really pulling their punches at the moment, both of them, and that at some point there's going to be a flurry of activity in which both sides are going to need to really utilise their strength. You can see over here actually some dismounted Serpent Guard look to have been made a little bit more crispy than they would like, which would indicate there has been a little bit of artillery action. Ardnheim shadow bows are moving forward. What are they actually firing at though as we go down through the gorge? Nothing actually. They're going to pull back once again, perhaps because they know they're going to attract the attention of both of those units of Belagaya archers on the other side of the chasm. Unit of standard Belagaya archers, however, a little bit less important, and they can move forward. Corsair infantry responding in kind. Ooh, flaming shots, so they're trying to bring the shield bearers, not shield bearers, seafarers. Shield bearers gone from the Umbar on the defence. Very depleted Serpent Guard, yeah, the Seafarers of Damos now routing. Right, what is going on here? Yet more TOL Amroth units moving forward, so still keen to make sure that all of these units haven't been committed for nothing, AFR. The Belfalas Marines getting into melee with the Corsair infantry, being joined by a clutch of Athalon man-at-arms. I mean, there's only so long that TOL Amroth are going to be able to keep this up for, surely. They've got their own pikes on the front line now as well. They need to be able to keep them supported with infantry though, which is perhaps the thinking behind committing all these units forward. The outer ammunition door and Urnal archers as well, just to add more numbers to this front line. I mean, it is a fairly fragile advance at this point without more support forthcoming, so perhaps the defenders will be happier about these events than the attackers, but TOL Amroth still doing their best to keep the defenders on their toes. Maybe a unit of quality. I mean, Parathor champions wouldn't go amiss. Perhaps some Black Swans. Meanwhile, Gondor also pushing forward now with a little bit more gusto. A combination of infantry and spearmen actually pushing the defensive line back a little bit. You can see, however, that this is going to be the ultimate problem for the attackers. When they do decide to move forward in force, they're always going to have to deal with skirmishes. I mean, as basic as the Southron archers may be, they're in a really ideal position to do damage to the Gondorians as they push forwards. Axemen of Lasarnak obviously make a very tempting target as well. High damage. I mean, not a huge amount of armoured units on the front line, so they may not be as damaging as they would otherwise be, but their damage is still going to be more than enough to do horrendous damage to Harad spearmen unless they're supported, which those archers provide the ideal support. Armoured though the Axemen of Lasarnak may be, still unshielded, and those arrows are still finding their marks. Pelagia Marines moving into position, and Harad, I think, see that and are going to try and push through the depleted Gondor front line and maybe engage them in melee. They will need to do so fairly promptly, otherwise they are going to take a few full-blooded volleys right to the face. Southron archers now changing their target to the Pelagia Marines now that the Axemen are suitably depleted. Again, the shield and armour values are there for the Pelagia Marines, like they are with many Gondorian units, but it's not as significant as it could be when you look at the rest of their roster. And now they're going to be forced onto the back foot, having to retreat. Still the TOL Amroth assault all of the black ships out in the harbour. These Athalon men-at-arms, I mean, they've held the line resolutely enough, but they've been constantly outclassed by the Umbar heavy infantry. It's been the other units that TOL Amroth have had nearby that they've had to try and rely on, like their archers. Perithal Champions are an altogether different unit though. They're kind of on the same level as the Alcarondas Legion, only in a different class of unit. Heavy swordsmen, much more focused around dealing that damage. They cause fear as well, but I think based on how the defenders appear to be in the ascendancy in this engagement, the fear isn't really going to come into effect. Those Black Swan Renegades could be useful though, some mace men. Do that little bit of extra damage to the Umbar heavy infantry that they need. Again, you can see that the range of projectiles though hitting the Black Swans as they move across the river. Armoured and shielded though they may be, ranger projectiles have a way of doing damage to everything as long as they're being shot into a suitable block. The Black Swans, all that really remains of the old Swan Knight model from back in vanilla, now they've been given a recoloration and made an infantry unit. Balagai pikemen are here, but they're getting shot directly by the Balagai archers. Not a huge amount of Numenor infantry presence on the front line now. You can see Numenorian Shield Guard are here, but only a section of the unit. The rest of the unit is actually just right there. I'm blind. Trying to get into these archers. Attacking artillery perhaps as well. Starting to turn up the heat a little bit more, Numenor. Armour upgraded Corsair infantry backing up the Balagai pikes is a basic front line, but it will suffice for holding a narrow choke point as long as they can get those shielded units on the front. But the presence of these Numenorian shield guard in behind enemy lines is making life a little bit more chaotic than the defenders would want it to be, I'm sure. Balagai archers continuing to shoot. I mean, they're trying to stop these supporting units from moving in, but again, it's not altogether a cohesive defensive effort from Umbar. I mean, hopefully for them, the Corsair infantry will naturally find their way to the front and the Balagai pikes can back them up, but if not, Corsair infantry and Balagai pikes, when they're disorganised, are going to find it very difficult to deal with Numenorian shield guard and cohort in close quarters. Over yonder, Numenorian cohort pushing back. So yeah, Numenor definitely cranking up the pressure on the defenders. I mean, they've always been committing these heavier infantry units, but they're committing them in numbers now to the point where the defenders are going to have to think about utilising more of their supporting units, I think. There are more Haradrim on the front line now, the Corsair infantry. You can see the devastation that has been wrought to the Muhards. Harazim nobles moving forward. I mean, this is a fairly bold move, given that there are basic armour-piercing spears here. They're not going to be able to escape their attentions. AP and anti-cavalry. Those hit points are going to start taking a bit of a beating, but they could force their way through. I mean, especially when you consider they're mainly trying to get through the area of the front line, which is being marshalled purely by out-of-ammo archers, which is surely a worry. Cavalry giving up on its intentions for now, but not taking as much damage as you may expect. And again, that's the benefit of having multiple HP cavalry on your side. Also blackguards. Very depleted unit, but still managing to hit the Numenor heavy infantry, and the Numenorian shield guard do end up routing in the end, presumably as a result of all of the support that's around and the losses they've taken. Corsair crossbowmen also shooting into them and now having to retreat, because immediately when Corsair crossbowmen make themselves known, they're going to attract the attention of the attacking archers. They're very fragile, but also very dangerous if you leave them unattended. What is going on over here? Looks as though TOL Amroth have scored a technical victory here. Very much a Pyrrhic victory, but TOL Amroth have managed to force the defenders back from this defensive position, which may very well have a knock-on effect for the Gondorians over here. Indeed, it looks as though, even though the defensive line was struggling under the attention of the Gondorian infantry, no reinforcements were forthcoming because it would be seen as a waste. Muhard Beastmasters going to be able to utilise their javelins and keep the Thalon halberdiers bleeding their manpower. So they're going to have to retreat. I mean, there's this area over here is what they're going to have to defend now. I mean, there's a couple of choke points. The attackers could also go around over here. I mean, there's plenty of routes they could take. Some are simply longer than others. So Gondor and Dol Amroth now have the opportunity maybe to relieve some pressure on the Numenorians also by going around this way, joining in the assault over here. They're not going to be able to do all of these things, however, because there's so many roads that they're going to need to concentrate their manpower in some places rather than just send one unit down each road. So they have a decision to make. Numenorian cohort dealing with the UIALGAER archers. Nice looking shields on the Numenorian cohort. I remember when Numenor got added into the game, clearly a lot of work went into their central units like this to make them similar but distinct from their descendants. Southron Warband and Corsair Blackguards in the background here that could move in support, but I'm not sure whether they will at this point. Southron Pikemen being overrun. Now in Iron Royal Guard firing in, javelins being used. I mean, this is a good opportunity to use them because there is a straight shot, and the Numenorian cohort is certainly a unit good enough to warrant utilising this kind of resource on. Over here, I mean, yeah, the UIALGAER pikemen have actually managed to set themselves up quite nicely. Numenorian cohort doing their best. I mean, there's not a huge amount of the Corsair infantry remaining. They paid a pretty hefty price for setting this defensive position up, but all it would really take is a couple of volleys from a supporting arch unit, and the UIALGAER pikemen will find themselves in serious trouble. So in many ways they're living on borrowed time, but they're still doing a good enough job at keeping the Numenorians at bay for now. Bit of an echo on those units, battle noises there, which is a little bit peculiar. Meanwhile, Gondorians and Dol Amroth taking their time for now, moving into position, but that isn't too surprising given that they have rather large armies, and if they unthinkingly lurch forward, stuff like Corsair Crossbowmen, potentially Hashari Stalkers, Castamir's Rangers, can take their pick of their best units if they're not careful. With Randir's retinue here, there's also the Athelian Rangers, something which I'm a little bit surprised the defenders have not noticed and have started to shoot, but that will be to the attackers' great benefit later on, maybe. So their marksmen, plenty of heavier archers that they can use in response as well, but again, terrain-wise, as you may expect, the defenders are going to have a fairly significant edge in terms of utilising their own skirmishers. Stuff like that Corsair Crossman hidden up on the side, that's exactly where they can be so good, because you can choose when to reveal them, and you're only going to reveal them when you see a target worth going after. Over here, meanwhile, out of ammunition UIALGAER archers. Again, maybe a bit of a footnote of an engagement this. Neither side seems too eager to commit something of genuine quality or numbers to be able to outright win the battle for this bridge. It appeared that the other engagement is considered more important by the attackers given the amount of heavy infantry they have committed. Seafarers of Niendamos. Actually, defeat seems certain with the Corsair Blackguards out of ammunition, and they and that spare unit of Southron Warband committed themselves to the fight. It has flipped back in favour of the defenders again somewhat. Arrow fire from across the way, Ardent Shadow Bows. I mean, they're having to bank their shots a little bit, so it's maybe not as effective as it could otherwise be, but it will still be pretty devastating, especially to the Southrons involved in this defence. Barrows and Nobles are there. I mean, they could take advantage of some gaps. Maybe they're hoping to pin these infantry units in place first and foremost with this unit of UIALGAER pikemen as they roll forwards. They're going to need to be used a little bit more deftly than that, I feel, the Barrows and Nobles. Let's go around a little bit. This way. Our infantry firing away, as are the UIALGAER archers, neither of which are too damaging, but a renewed effort over here as well. I say that, out of ammunition steel bows. I don't know what they were used on, maybe they were used on supporting units as and when they were used, but steel bows are going to be good enough in melee, and you can see here that without any further infantry support, the Numenorians are going to be able to smash their way through here. And the Pharazôn nobles have also found their way through, so all of a sudden the Corsair infantry and Balagair archers are hideously exposed. And that's going to result in a bit of a bloodbath. These transitional phases are where the attackers can really punish the defenders for leaving units undefended and unsupported. Pharazôn nobles rushing forth. Sathron Warband running for the hills. I mean, they're going to try and get through this area of the defence. I mean, to be fair, there is a choke point they can occupy here and over there. I mean, the Gondorians are on the way, which explains why perhaps they're not going to be too eager to continue holding this settlement and continue to commit more resources to it, because the defenders will find themselves outflanked, certainly. It's actually a fairly large Gondorian force as well, so they've placed a great deal of stock in assisting their Numenor brethren. That was a good hit from the trebuchet there. It may only be on Balagair footmen, but that was a lot of Balagair footmen that perished in that volley. And that will make the Gondorians' transit just that little bit easier. Balagair footmen retreating. Pharazôn nobles thinking about moving forward, but I mean, if they get a charge into the Trollmen, it wouldn't be the worst thing, but if they just bumped into them in melee, it would be devastating for the Numenorian cavalry. A banked shot that misses the Muhard Berserkers on every count. Are we seeing these skirmishers use? No, they're still in hiding for now. TOL Amroth, of course, most heavily depleted following their exertions in the first round of defences. Oh dear. A devastating blow for Tundra's Fox, but it was to be expected. If you put your artillery that close to a ledge in Medieval 2, you're just asking for trouble, which is a real shame because, I mean, if the trebuchet it can still be fired from here, it's not going to be able to move, but they may as well dump all of their ammunition at this point into this Gondorian assault because they're not going to be able to move their artillery piece any longer. It looks incredibly goofy, but it's going to be incredibly effective as well at dealing with these Gondorians. A huge amount of kills there, which is going to cause routing as well. A lot of these units of Gondorians, their morale isn't bad, but it's basic. Taking that amount of damage from trebuchets very quickly is going to be very damaging to them. Axemen of Lasarnak, again a damaging unit, but it's not really going to matter too much if the trebuchet can continue to do that level of damage to all of these units. Looking further afield, Mithrandir's retinue is also over here. There's still a little bit of fighting going on as the Corsair infantry and Balagair archers fight to the bitter end. And they're actually being given a little bit more leeway than they would expect, so they're going to do slightly better. I mean, considering the calibre of units they're going up against, they're still not going to do amazingly, but I mean, they could be getting charged by cavalry, they could be surrounded by infantry, so they're having a better time of it than they could otherwise be. Over here, Numenorian cohort facing off against the Corsair Blackguards, what remains of them anyway, and this is going to give the route into the settlement that all of this Numenor infantry is going to need. Maybe Gondor have begun their assault on this area a little bit too soon. I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter with the trebuchet there, and with it having really no choice but to use all of its ammunition on this Gondorian assault. And this has gone really badly for the Gondorians in the end. It looked like it could go quite well, but the trebuchet, one of the trebuchets has actually fallen so far down the hill that it's gone back onto flat terrain, but it's also inside the rock wall somewhat. And they are still able to utilise their ammunition over there. Axemen of Lasarnak getting themselves into a position that's... and here we have Pharazôn nobles, so some cavalry able to get some decent charges going into these dismounted serpent guardsmen. Mithrandir's retinue charging from the other side. Looks like they had actually less success. I mean, this unit of serpent guard is taking an awful lot of damage, but they won't mind too much. And that is a thrown projectile. Corsair fencers. Maybe they are just trying to bait the Numenorians into range of all these projectiles so that they can deal with all this cavalry so it won't prove to be a thorn in their side later. I mean, it will cost them a unit of pretty good infantry if that is their plan. 2 units of Pharazôn nobles as well. I mean, these are tanky units of cavalry. The Corsair fencers throwing daggers will have the desired result eventually, though. Saffron pikes. The catapult's there, but it doesn't really have... I mean, it's far enough away to the point where it would be a bit of a gamble to shoot into the Dol Amrothian line right now. The rest of the Gondorians are here. Of course, their crossbows choose now to be the moment where they reveal themselves. What are they going to shoot at, though? There's got to be something of value here. Fountain Guard, I think they're going after, yeah. I mean, late game, the Fountain Guard could prove to be a devastating force, but they're getting bullied here a little bit. Wojciech maybe panicking a little bit, considering his attack on the other side has gone really badly in the face of those trebuchet volleys. And now he needs to get out of harm's way of that unit of Corsair crossbows with some of his better units, otherwise it's going to be a bad time for him. I mean, he still has a lot of units over here, so it's not as if he's crippled or anything going further on into the fight, but still worth bearing in mind. Catapult. Trying to bank those shots, trying to hit the Haven Guard in the distance, but they're probably going to go into loose formation and get behind whatever cover they can. A little bit bloodied actually, so they must have seen a little bit of action, or at least a little bit of attention from defending skirmishers. I mean, there's 2 units of the Haven Guard, so you can use one of them a little bit more freely than the one that contains Imrahil. It's not a huge army for Dol Amroth, so they really were quite forthright in their initial assault, but it was for the greater good, I think we can all agree. It allowed Gondor to get through with less damage done, albeit that's probably been recouped fairly quickly as a result of that attack being turned back. Axon of Lasarnak, as soon as they poke their heads around the corner, they're immediately drawing the attention of this unit of Southron archers. I think we're... Trebuchet there. Unlucky actually to not hit right up the line here of these Balagai footmen and Southron pikemen. I mean, not the most elite of units, but that would have been enough to basically evaporate that unit in a single volley. Are they still going to try and attack? No, Morris conserving his ammo, being a little bit more careful and cautious. We are seeing, I think, a little bit of a lull in proceedings. In fact, what I'm going to do here is make a little bit of a cut and rejoin when the infantry engagements are getting underway, because there's going to be quite a hefty transit time, I think, for these Numenorians to actually get into the settlement. The Gondorians have relented on their assault for now, and also Dol Amroth is still fairly far away as well. For now, it's just a case of artillery trading back and forth and a little bit of skirmishing going on by the defenders, which is not the most exciting thing for me to commentate over. So yeah, I'll make a cut, and we'll rejoin when the battle is truly getting underway again. Actually, you know what, I'm going to rejoin here. There's not actually a melee engagement going on at the moment, but there's a huge amount of range pressure coming from the Numenorians here, a huge amount of armour-piercing projectiles being used, and they are showering their damage down upon this unit of trollmen, so they definitely see where the dangerous units lie in and amongst the defenders. All of the attacking armies would rightly fear what the trollmen bring to the table in terms of damage. Elsewhere, still some Serpent Guard, the Muhad Berserkers, loitering with malicious intent, but also doing some hefty damage to this unit of Balagai footmen. Maybe just trying to whittle down and damage a lot of these defences so that the initial push is all that much more effective. Seafarers of Nindamos as well. Only basic Southrons here, but again, when the infantry comes down, when the hammer falls, it's probably going to be pretty dicey for the defenders if this kind of damage is allowed to continue. More damage. Defensive artillery being used. I mean, transiting through this settlement and its narrow streets means you kind of have to bunch up. Going after narrow sentinels as well is a very worthwhile target. Still a small matter of that trebuchet as well, which is stuck in place now on the hillside. A very bizarre situation, but one that we have seen before in Ventu. Muhad Beastmasters revealing themselves as well, so a bit of cavalry action going on here. Shari Shadows getting into the door and Ernal archers. What are the camel riders going to be able to accomplish? They're going to charge in here. Well, they actually relent on that cavalry charge, so they're able to utilise their javelins, and they do go after the Haven Guard, a predictable unit to go after, but it's going to be pretty effective maybe. Or the Harad, a nice little bit of cavalry action there, hidden in those trees in that little section of the settlement. There's also a couple more units hidden in the background. There's some Muhard Beastmasters, which actually are not hidden, you can see them. But this kind of cavalry is the sort of thing which Gondor and Dol Amroth are still going to have to put up with. Going after the Black Swan Renegades as well. Another decent target. I mean, they may already be depleted, but that armour piercing is the sort of thing which Umbar would like to see gone, and Harad are going to indulge them. Dol Amroth's archers going after the Shari Shadows. I'd assume that at this point, though, they're probably out of ammunition, which is why they're being used as a cudgel, really, for charging into these archers. Otherwise, they would surely be being saved till later. We already saw their projectiles being used against Dol Amroth earlier. Not enough Parathor champions are here to defeat this unit of Balagai footmen in melee. Assault is going on over here by the Numenorian Steelbows, but that is a flurry of Corsair crossbow fire. So I would imagine that this attack is going to fall apart pretty quickly. In spite of the damage that the Numenorian skirmishers did, the defensive skirmishers simply have a better position to take up, and there's enough cannon fodder that the defenders can still use on this front line to hold the attacking infantry in place while stuff like the Corsair crossbows and Corsair fencers do their thing. And to be fair, I mean, a lot of these Moonhards are going to be AP in melee, a lot of the south ones are, so basic though they may be, all this armour piercing damage will still add up over time. Iron Rule Guard. Trying to go after the Balagai archers perhaps, or are they going after the Narada Iron Rule Guard? Doesn't really matter either way. They're doing some damage. Attackers trying to use their skirmishes. They may not be able to do so as effectively as the defenders based on the terrain, but it will still add up, and also Harad are the faction on the field which is going to be most vulnerable to all types of skirmish fire, as opposed to the heavily armoured offerings that every other faction has. Now an Iron Royal Guard coming in here. They're a very durable unit after all. Their presence on the front line will be greatly appreciated, I'm sure. So crossbows. Elsewhere, Dol Amroth is still here, skirmishing with the enemy. Tirithea marksmen, marksmen Carandrus, a lot of heavier archers still alive, even for the Dol Amroth army, so they're just going to be able to pour arrow fire into this section over here again. And another example perhaps of how the attackers can slowly whittle the defenders down. The defenders have done some good work here, but ultimately, as often can be the case, come the late game, the defenders may find themselves with not as much strength as the attackers, just based on either quality, in this case in a 4v4, or numbers, as it can be if the defenders are outnumbered by an army or two. But their basic units are not going to be as resilient to arrow fire as they would like, and all of this damage may very well end up adding up in the long run. Catapult volleys. Balagai footmen trundling downhill. After the trebuchet, but you're not going to be able to kill off the entire crew, especially given how many of your arrows and bolts and javelins you've already used in this defence, so you want to be using them, I think, on more elite units. Umbar may be counter-attacking, seeing an opportunity perhaps to come down this hill, because there is no attack forthcoming ever since that Gondorian one fell apart, so a good opportunity to maybe take the fight to the streets down in this section of the settlement again. Balagai archers and seafarers of Nindamos drawing the attention of the catapult. I mean, they're densely packed enough to the point where it is worthwhile going after them. There's also Numenorian steel bows who have a fair amount to offer in melee, as well as at range. So far, I think the defenders can afford to be very pleased with how their skirmish campaign has gone, but there's still a lot of this battle left to go. It's a long battle, this one, so we can't draw too many conclusions just yet. Some upgraded Gondorian archers out of ammunition. I mean, it's bold of them to take the fight to Trollman, because it's pretty much the ideal target for Trollman. a unit that has all of its defensive attributes bound up in their armour and is not really able to do much damage to them in return. UIALGAER Marines are here. Pharaohs and Nobles are getting in behind enemy lines. Serpent Guardsmen have taken a fair amount of damage, to be fair. UIALGAER Marines. And a nice rear charge here from the Pharaohs and Nobles. Harad still loitering around the place. Serpent's Fangs firing away. Poison projectiles, could that be a good move here? I mean, some of the Gondorians are already routing, given the kind of foes they're facing. Yeah, I would say at this point in the battle, especially with the more depleted Gondorians and Dol Amrothians, poison projectiles may be a more important factor against them. Beast Hunters, I mean, the defenders are being forced back, even in spite of the damage their skirmishers are doing. Serpent's Fangs also attracting the attention, and that is the whistle of crossbow bolts going after the marksman of Caer Andros. Yeah, the Serpent's Fangs attracting the attention of the attacking archers, but Serpent's Fangs of all Harad skirmishers are going to be the best at dealing with that sort of thing. The first general falls, a Harad general as well, so the defenders, I mean, there is no town centre, so routing could be a problem, and of all the factions on the field, Harad probably the most fragile when it comes to their morale. Parathil champions on the way forward. Looks as though the defenders thought twice before sallying forth into the settlement to try and go after the artillery. Instead they've opted for the more conservative approach and getting into a more defensive position. I mean, it was a risk, to be fair, and you don't want to be giving the attackers any more of an edge than they already have in this sort of situation. Flaming shot being used, so they are very keen on using their skirmishers to deal morale damage, perhaps more so than physical damage at this point, the defenders, hoping that that can be a way that they can win the day. I mean, a lot of these trollmen are taking a real beating at the hands of these javelins at this point. It's not the sort of damage that can be safely ignored. The trollmen moving forward, Pharaohs and Nobles trying to charge into the front of the trollmen. I don't think that's going to end too well for the Numenor riders. Backed up by skirmishers that are out of ammunition. At the very least, the seafarers are somewhat designed to go into melee afterwards. Maybe not to be able to combat a foe like the trollmen, but they will try. I mean, I suppose the trollmen don't have all that much in terms of armour, so the one-handed axes that they utilise actually will be a little bit more effective against the trollmen, but they'll take so much damage in return that they won't be able to dish out that little bit extra damage as well as they would like. Here are the champions of Nathrat right in and amongst things. Maybe a little bit isolated here, which is bad news for the defenders. Like I said at the start, they're probably the single most effective infantry unit the defenders have against these kind of attackers. And if they get dealt with in a way that's fairly efficient, bad news bears for Harad. The marksman of Caer Andros will put up something of a fight against them as well. Those two-handed swords they wield. Those Corsair crossbows, I mean, this fight is fairly chaotic, not in terms of the infantry, but more in terms of all of the skirmishers that are trading blows back and forth. It's really hard to tell who's actually getting the better end of this, because yes, the attackers have taken a lot of damage on the approach, but they're also having to use a lot of their resources fairly quickly. They've revealed stuff like their Corsair crossbows, which are being focused down by the attackers. The attackers themselves have been able to get some decent hits onto the front line, maybe not as good, but still, it all adds up in the end. Another charge from Pharaohs and Nobles, yet again, these champions of Nathrat. This is going to be a problem. Fairly healthy unit of Black Swan Renegades getting ready to add themselves to the front line. Probably not a good idea to send them up against the Trollman, but they can bide their time and wait. So far, the entire fight really is based around this one area. I think the attackers should be looking into pushing up this hill as well, because if they don't, they're missing a bit of a trick, I think. They need to be trying to engage on as many choke points as they can, and at this point there are only 2 to pick from based on where the defenders have decided to hold their lines. Gondor of course still have to maintain some sort of rearguard because of the Haradrim camel riders that are still over there. Meanwhile, here's a little bit of a sally forth moving in now. Pharaohs and nobles moving in. The Demons of the Desert, I think they count as two-handed spears in melee, so in sustained melee against cavalry, the Demons of the Desert are actually going to be really effective. They are somewhat fragile in comparison to their other Trollmen brethren though, but unparalleled in terms of the amount of damage they can dish out. Perhaps the scariest unit on the field in terms of fast damage dealing potential, but I'm not entirely sure what they're doing. They're moving forward unsupported, whittling down a unit of already depleted Pharaohs and nobles, but surely the attackers will notice this and send something to deal with them post-haste. Meanwhile, Serpent's Fangs moving backwards. Trollmen still says victory seems certain, perhaps as a result of the units they're facing off against on the front line being ill-equipped to deal with them, like out of ammunition Doranano archers are not going to be the answer against Trollmen, I'm afraid. Numenorian cohort are a little bit better though. The armour piercing will be very useful by the Trollmen, but at this point they've taken enough damage, I think, to the point where the reinforcements being provided by the Numenorian cohort and the Gondor spearmen will probably be enough to overwhelm the finest that Harad has to offer. Southron archers in a good position to skirmish once again, but they are attracting the attention of the marksmen of Caerandros. They're going after the Athelian Rangers though, which is a very good choice of target. Unlike the Ardenheim Shadowbows, the Athelian Rangers not quite as solid when under arrow fire, even if it's very basic, such as what the Southron archers can provide. Taking hits. Numenorian Shield Guard on the way forward, so plenty of armour piercing waiting in the wings between the Black Swans and the Numenorian Shield Guard. There's also still a ton of attacking archer fire trying to do damage to the defenders, and maybe Umbar taking the front line earlier on is going to come back to haunt the defenders a little bit, because if it's mostly Harad that are left, and it does look as though it's going to have to be a Haradrim-led final stand for the most part, they are going to be more vulnerable to these kind of siege tactics from the attackers. Maybe made a little bit of a misstep by revealing the Athelian Rangers this early though, because it gives the defenders all the excuse they need to continue to use their own archers. Muhard Beast Hunters still have ammunition, and they are going to start also using their javelins on the front line. Balagaya Pikemen in here, and it's a decent blob of units regardless, so throwing their javies in would not be a worst idea in the world. Right, what's going on here? Numenorian cohort are fighting. Oh dear, Cad Bane. I don't know if they still had ammunition left or what, those Demons of the Desert, but if they did, then that's a pretty sinful waste there, because they've just... I mean, I appreciate the fact that he tried to be aggressive, but he's been aggressive with only one unit you can't afford to be too careless with, and Numenor have deftly diffused that potential calamity that was heading toward them. Still got plenty of units in reinforcing range back here as well, including the Sentinels and the Pharazim Swordmasters, exactly the kind of units the defenders won't want to be seeing later on. Balagaya archers. The new elements of this settlement have already been used really at this stage. I think there are some slight differences in terms of how the roads up to the final stand have been constructed, but for the most part now we're seeing what this map used to be as well. There are 2 Corsair Blackguards. The DPS is obviously going to be very, very limited, but slowly but surely they will be able to do damage up here, and best of all, they probably won't attract the attention of enemy archers. Southron archers dealing with an advance from the Numenorian cohort. I say dealing with an advance, being trampled by an advance by the Numenorian cohort. Attacking artillery, I mean, this is a fairly decent blob, including the champions of Nafarat. They're fortunate really that hit the Muhard Beast Hunters are not champions, because if they hit centre mass of them, that would be a tragic loss, and again, hitting not only the champions of Nafran, but also doing a decent amount of damage there to the Southron Pike. You need to not blob up as best you can. I know that's easier said than done given the room that the defenders have to work with at this point, but attacking artillery doing its thing, getting yet more damage done, hitting the Trollman. Cad Bane needs to spread his units out a little bit more as the inexorable advance of the Numenorians and their descendants continues, attacking their fell brethren. Balagai footmen, beast hunters that are now out of ammunition, pulling out their maces. Again, another example of Haradrim armor piercing in melee, which may not be all that elite, but again, it's just another unit adding to that little bit of armor piercing sting that they have, and that will be enough to do some good damage to the Numenorian cohort. Again, all of this attacking artillery and all of this attacking arrow fire is proving to be pretty withering for the defenders, it must be said. Catapult is here. Balagai archers. I mean, there's not a huge amount of reinforcements at this point. There was the elite units that I mentioned for Numenor back there. A few units from the Gondorians. Amroth have committed most of their units a little bit further forward. They may still have a unit of Haven Guard or some such back here. Fountain Guard in the late game could yet prove to be important, even though one unit got mauled by those Corsair crossbowmen early on. Ooh. They haven't learnt their lesson, have they? I mean, I guess the reward of getting your catapult into the right position is somewhat worthwhile, but they've been made to pay for that. Rotting meat being utilised, which actually may prove to be very useful for the attackers here. Or it may prove to be their own undoing if they end up taking and suffering morale damage that they didn't really want to be. Catapult moving backwards. Wuhan Beastmasters throwing their projectiles in. Valakith's shield bearers moving onto the front line now as well, so Umbar still do have units left to offer outside of just Balagai units. I mean, the armour piercing will be useful. Numenor cohort actually is shaking, so yeah, in the end, this is actually proving to be more of a problem for the attackers, this rotting meat strategy, which is strange. I wouldn't have expected that either, given that these are more elite Numenor and Dol Amroth units that are taking to the melee. Very depleted Gondor spearmen, taking some javelin fire.
They have lost half their men.
Have they indeed? Numenor and Shield Guard pulling off the front line now, actually. Perhaps seeing they're taking too many losses for this to be worthwhile. More javelins. Doing their thing. Southron archers also being engaged in melee. It look like they still have ammunition actually, so that is a bit of a problem for the defenders because they need all of their skirmishers to utilise all their ammo first, really. Tirithea marksmen are obviously going to be better in melee, but they're also somewhat stretched and somewhat engaged by shield bearers as well. The kind of foe they won't want to face. Trebuchet out of ammunition, so the crew being sent in now just to get some more warm bodies on the front line. Oh dear. Tragic. Something the defenders will have to deal with, though, the fact that more than one of their artillery pieces at this point has slid down the hill and has become significantly less effective as a result. Meanwhile, these Corsair crossbows are taking hits from clear projectiles. Would that be Ardenheim shadow bows, I wonder? It is. They're a depleted unit, but they know what kind of target they want to try and surgically remove from the battlefield, and yeah, the Corsair crossbow is definitely one such unit that you want to be dealing with in this regard. They've already proven their worth to the defenders in this battle. The Trebuchet crew trying to interrupt them in melee as well. They're not quite going to make it though, as they scurry forwards. They're surely going to rout. They're going to go after the catapult crew of Harad. I mean, there are more of them, if only just. Again, maybe a little bit careless from the defenders to allow this to happen in the first place. I mean, it's easily remedied, but Muhard Beast Hunters. Four Pharazim nobles managed to find their way through the front line. With that torch he's carrying going absolutely wild. And charging into this unit of Southron archers, cycle charging is probably the best they can manage. Everyone needs to do their bit for the cause at this point. These Balak shield bearers, they've really actually performed rather well on this front line at this point. Very often they tend to be a somewhat underwhelming unit, but their contribution here to this battle has probably been the best we've seen them perform in a while. They've done exactly what they've needed to so far. They're surely going to get overwhelmed now though with the addition of some Caer Andros marksmen and the anchor that these upgraded Doran pikemen will provide. Also have fencers being added to help shore things up as well, dual wielding their rapiers. Yeah, the Trebuchet crew do end up routing in the end, to absolutely no one's surprise. Well, one of them does anyway, the Wound Raiders. Morris's, on the other hand, is actually going to destroy this catapult crew. So again, this is extremely careless from the defenders. I mean, it's very fortuitous for the attackers, and they deserve credit if they can complete pulling this off, but we shall see. No one has noticed this? I find that hard to believe. Beast Hunters being added to melee, out of ammo though they may be, again, like I said. Those little clubs they wield. What is going on here? Are they going to retreat from this front line now? Seeing perhaps that it's not worth it with the continued arrow fire that they're taking in this location. Still no sign of an assault coming up this hill over here. So you know, Southron pikemen in the way, but even just a small attack would be enough, I think, to light a fire under the defenders. Balakith's shield bearers continue to struggle on the front line. Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. And Southron archers are saying that in melee. It's an interesting engagement it must be. Doran pikemen acting as the anchor. Flaming shot coming down here now. Actually more likely to rout their own men at this point with the Balakith shield bearers getting overrun, but Cad Bane does commit forward a unit of trollmen. This is where the Doran pikemen can really earn their keep by forcing the trollmen back with that superior range that pikes are known for. Serpent's Fang is getting involved in melee as well, but also attracting the attentions of this unit of Balagair archers back here, which continues to hammer on the defence. Another unit of archers. There's still some Athenian rangers left alive as well. Depleted though they may be, veterans of Osgiliath, so plenty of attacking archers still. Most of them more defensively minded archers perhaps, but this kind of damage is really, surely it's going to add up over the course of this battle. Still those camel riders over there, which will be biding their time and waiting perhaps for the even later game. You need to choose the right time to commit themselves though, because if it looks as though you're going to lose as the defenders, you don't want to leave it so late that the camel riders can then no longer make the difference that you want them to. Depleted unit of Muhard Berserkers getting onto the front line as well, yet more AP. Been such a punishing and elongated fight for both sides this. The armour piercing that Harad have in melee and the defensive positions have made life very difficult on the attackers, but the attackers themselves have used their skirmishers and their cavalry, their non-infantry tools, really rather well to punish the defenders as and when they've been able. Southron archers waiting, biding their time. Athelian rangers doing the same. These clear projectiles. Trying to rip through the Serpent's Fangs, seeing them perhaps as more of a danger. They still have a bit of ammunition, they're also in good melee combat, but they're very depleted at this point. There's only 17 champions of Nafrat that remain as well, so they're investing an awful lot into holding the defenders here, or holding the attackers here I should say, are the defenders, but is that going to prove to be wise in the long run? I'm not so sure. Still the trebuchet that has slipped down the hill. Most of the unit is there. Still have a little bit of their own ammunition here, the defenders. They've made pretty good use of it from my perspective so far in this battle, but whether that will continue, I'm not sure. Adonai Shadowbow is getting into a rather menacing position, looking like the infantry reinforcements that Cad Bane has provided to this front line, they're going to be enough to slow the attackers, but ultimately it's going to be a doomed endeavour. Here you can see the Adonai Shadowbows taking hits from the newly liberated Southron archers. The armour will help them more so than they did against the Athelian Rangers, but they still lose their nerve and are going to retreat from the situation here. Champions of Nephrat are taking hits from the javelins, and this will probably be the end of them. Lango's unit, which actually did manage to escape from its earlier exertions, but I don't think they're going to be able to get away from this. I mean, with the unit so depleted at this point, you could argue that all of this ranger ammunition and all of these javelins could actually be better used elsewhere, as strong as the Champions of Nephrat are. But we shall have to wait and see on that count. Belagair archers firing in, point blank range. Yet the attackers still have more, a unit of nearly 100 Belagair archers heading to the front line. Plenty of reinforcements as well, as you would expect, but I mean the defenders don't have nothing up here. A lot of it is kind of basic. The Northern Arrow Sentinels still have the Harbingers of Castellina. Could they yet prove to be important? Champions of Nephrat did take hits from that trebuchet, but they are still healthy enough to the point where they can still be a major determining factor in this fight. And going up just this one choke point rather than taking advantage of the two, is that going to come back to haunt the attackers? The fact that the defenders can focus their infantry and skirmisher strength on one avenue of attack rather than two. Of course, their fence is a little bit depleted at this point, but jumping on the attackers as they move forward to try and engage against the defending Belagair archers, as the attacking Belagair archers, rather confusingly, are the ones to try and engage with them. Of course, their fencers are much better in melee, however, and there are also the depleted champions of Nephrat to consider too, but the rest of the line is being forced back rather succinctly. Belfalas Marines pushing through. All that remains really is this heavily depleted unit of Serpent's Fangs, which is going to get overrun momentarily. Southron pikemen marching downhill. Committing more. I think this is a mistake from Cad Bane. I think there's no real sense in sending this rather healthy unit of Southron pikemen down here simply to die. I think what they should have done is maybe formed up another defensive position here. I mean, it would still be only the one choke point then, you could do far more. I mean, maybe what they want to do is keep the attackers down here so they can use more of these arrows first and foremost, but I mean, these Southron pikemen are not going to last very long at all. Formation is compromised, they're getting shot, morale is highly questionable at this point. Belagair archers going to try and get away, but the Numenorian Shield Guard probably won't allow them to. Oh, he got hit so hard that he did the crazy death and then 2D T-posed into the ground. You'd love to see it. This is going to end about as poorly for the Southron pikemen as you would expect. There's a lot of Belagair archers that did manage to escape, to be fair, the clutches of the Numenorian Shield Guard, but again in these transitional phases the attackers can always punish the defenders for any missteps they may take. ready. Still this trebuchet crew, which can't really move at this point, I suppose. Seafarers and Umbar was actually forming up a defensive position in case the defenders wanted to sally out again, but that went very badly with the Demons of the Desert before, so I doubt we're going to be seeing a second attempt by any of the defenders to do that. As brave a move as it may be. In comes another unit of Southron pikemen, this one from Lango. Belagaer archers doubling back. They're going to need the support, I think, of the trollmen if they're going to successfully do significant damage to all of these armour-piercing spears, both the Numenor and Shield Guard, and we're also seeing some Citadel Guard from the Gondorians joining their similar brethren in the melee fight. A little bit further back, the Southron pikemen are shuffling around. One Numenorian cohort remains. Also crossbowmen trying to shoot into appropriate targets, and what more appropriate target could there be than the very, very dangerous Pharism Swordmasters going into the late game. They represent a power spike that will be very difficult to deal with, but as long as the defenders still have a unit of Corsair crossbows and or the like, they can pin them in place and do damage that way. And also with stuff like Trollmen and Champions of Nathrat, it's not as if they're completely defenceless in melee. Harbingers of Castamere as well, of course, they're lesser cousins, you could call them. Belfast Marines are actually still fighting something. Finishing off the last of Lango's Champions of Nathrat. They'll go down swinging, I'm sure, but TOL Amroth still very much alive in this fight. Warns of the White Tower and Fountain Guard on their way forwards. One final effort as we move into what really is going to be an elongated final stage of this fight, and it's going to be longer than 10,000 frames, but considering this is just a longer fight in general, that is somewhat appropriate for the situation. Paradil champions, so they are now going to move up this way as well, given the fact that they can hit these units in the back. I mean, I think, to be fair, they're actually going to win this fight before these reinforcements arrive regardless, so in the end a bit of a moot point. Trollmen of Harad. Southron pikes are here. Of course, our crossbowman. It's almost a certainty, and again, a lot of this is going to be based on the kind of damage that also crossbowmen are capable of chucking out, but still there's also attacking skirmishers to be concerned with, and yet more of these squishy Southron pikemen being targeted by attacking archers and falling away pretty quickly to boot. Belagaer archers firing away with reckless abandon, trying to again use flaming shot, but I really don't think that that's going to work at this point. Again, you always run the risk, I think, of routing your own men off as well. I mean, to be fair, the Dornell pikemen are shaken. They Numenor and Shield Guard are pulling off the front line, which I think is actually a bit of a mistake. That kind of thing is the sort of thing which will allow, honestly, this kind of tactic to work out a little bit better. As Belagaer footmen overextending themselves a bit. Going to try and be a defensive bulwark here in the late game as the defenders continue to do their best to outlast the attack. It's been very evenly balanced, this fight. Trebuchet crew. They've been stuck in this position for a while, and now they're going to be put out of their misery, I suppose. Belfast Marines fresh from dealing with the last of the Champions of Nathrat, and their reward is more combat, also combat where this time they're very likely to perish. Still plenty of reinforcements, which is the worrying thing, I suppose, for the attackers. Harbingers of Castamere still there and waiting. Our Iron Guard, they perhaps still have a fair amount of ammunition, and also in the late game they may not be the most damaging thing, but they're such a tanky unit that they can be a real difference maker when it comes to chipping in melee too. Ballooning their shots long, trying to hit the champions of Nafrat, do as much damage to them as they possibly can before they inevitably get into melee. Harbingers of Castamere also waiting. They've got their own Nara and Aru Sentinels and another unit of Alcarondas Legion. Could yet be important, taking a lot of damage there from projectiles themselves. Belgaer and Pikemen taking damage. I mean, both sides have, I think, used their skirmish ammunition rather well. It's always bad news for the defenders when that happens, though, because the attackers, they're under less pressure to do that, and the fact they've managed to is significant, I think. Ravenhelm's being hounded by the Beastmasters as they move forward, so the Camel Riders have revealed themselves. More Javelin ammunition could be forthcoming. I mean, they're going to go after probably they're going after the Warns of the White Tower. I would actually argue that maybe the Fountain Guard could be the better choice of target, but I mean, to be fair, it's much of a muchness really. You're going to be doing damage to very elite infantry units, which you need to try and blunt the fangs of. Good use of the Camel Riders here though by Cad Bane. Ravenhelms could prove to be an important unit in the late game as well, with that damage that Heavy Swordsmen can do. Haven Guard. That's 2 units of Haven Guard that are still alive, as far as Swordmaster. But I think in terms of, there are several units of just sheer quality that the attackers still have left. Interestingly enough though, I think they need to stop messing around and get some of those on the front line, because they could end up running out of support units for these elites, and we've already seen somewhat recently in that Glade Mist battle that Sin of the Darkcloud sent me that the dwarves were made to pay for that against a much more rank and file Dol Amroth army. Veterans of Osgiliath forcing the Beastmasters back, allowing the Gondorians to climb the hill. Still there's Corsair Crossmen menacingly in place with their crossbows. Surprisingly, the Veterans of Osgiliath are not up here yet, trying to counter-skirmish into them, to be honest. A few Numenorians able to get in behind enemy lines and go after the Belgaer archers, but in terms of sheer numbers, surely the archers will be okay for now. Units of genuine quality, actually more forthcoming from the defenders here as the Harbingers of Castamere join the Trollmen on the front line. Again, I still think it's going to be difficult for the defenders from here on out. Attacking Belgaer pikemen as well, acting as a very nice anchor. The Southron pikemen's formation once again looking a little bit more buckled than they would like, as we now more or less enter the final 10k frames in proceedings here. And the defenders find themselves down by 3%. And that's bad news considering the sheer quality that the attackers still have left, so I'd be very surprised if the defenders could make a comeback from here and win. If they can, it'll be courtesy of their crossbows. Perhaps they've got Castamere's Rangers somewhere? Got another unit of Harbingers, Champions of Nafrat. I don't know. I think maybe it's going to be a bridge too far for them. Considering they've had more basic tools than the attackers, it's been a very bloody encounter. It's been like a slower burn, in spite of the fact that both sides have been reasonably aggressive. It's almost like both sides have invested more in defensive units, and so it's been more of a grind. But in the end, I think the defenders are going to be made to pay for that a little bit more, which is not too surprising given that maybe Harad are less equipped for that kind of warfare. The more depleted unit of Haven Guard is adding themselves to the front line, trying to go round the flank, and they will of course be far superior to Belgaer footmen in melee. Elsewhere, you have Beastmasters coming back for another bite of the cherry, perhaps. Veterans of Osgiliath moving back over here, trying to deal with some Corsair fences that have revealed themselves. I mean, on the approach, the plan here from Wojciech is very clear. Hammer them with arrows from the Veterans of Osgiliath. There's also some Hashari Shadows, but they're out of ammunition, as we well know. Pharism Swordmasters could also just double back fairly easily and deal with those Corsair fences. I mean, the Camel Riders and the Fencers trying to act as a sort of relief force, but I don't think it's going to be enough in the grand scheme. Numenor General forms. Will they though? I don't know about that. Haven Guard.
Pray the course of this battle changes, because defeat seems almost certain.
The announcer seems to share my disposition about this fight. Alcarondas Legion and Numenor Sentinels pushing forward, but it might be a little bit too late for this. I mean, they will still hold the line decently enough in the short term. I mean, yeah, I guess with the loss of a general, flaming shot and trying to rout the enemy is probably your best bet at this point. I don't really see what the point of pulling these pikemen off the front line is. I mean, at this point you may as well just bank up on the front line, make yourself as strong as possible up front, and then hope that you can rout them through other means, crossbows and flaming arrows, because outside of that, and isolating the most elite units that the attackers have left, I don't really see how the defenders can recover from this. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Over yonder, Haven Guard. And yeah, the veterans of Osgiliath acting as the defensive line, along with the very depleted Athenian Rangers. So the Corsair fences will have to face some resistance, and again, based on the damage, they'll probably take on the approach. Again, armor piercing though. Veterans of Osgiliath probably wouldn't like facing the fences in melee. But it's now or never really for the fences. Fountain Guards still in reserve. Pharazim Swordmasters, the other unit of Haven Guard. So yeah, this is, I think, the this is the attackers. They're going to attempt to turn the screw with plenty of really high quality heavy swordsmen. Bit of javelin support as well from these Pelagia Marines. Haven Guard. Yeah, they're going to get in and amongst these Corsair crossmen as well, which is obviously a devastating blow for the defenders, because this really is their last hope. Champions of Nafrat running away again, which, again, I'm not really sure what the point of this is. This will they, won't they kind of thing with the Sentinels, and now with the Champions of Nafrat. Like, there's nowhere else to go. Like, one unit as a last stand up there is not going to be more effective than just sending them in now to try and remedy the situation. Yeah, I think they know at this point that crossbows are not going to be able to escape. Pharazim Swordmasters and Haven Guard.
We have lost half of our men.
A truly overwhelming amount of power for a unit of dirty-faced pirates to have to try and repel. And the Champions of Nafrat will give it a good go, as will the Harbingers of Castamere. There goes Imrahil. So I mean, plenty of attacking generals are losing their lives as they push forwards here. Forward come the Wardens of the White Tower for perhaps another one that could add their name to that list, but again, I think it's not going to be enough of a factor. I mean, the Haven Guard are going to turn around and buy time for the Pharazim Swordmasters. I think the attackers know they can afford to lose a General's Bodyguard unit or two if it means dealing with the Corsair crossbows, because this is really the only chance the defenders have left of turning this fight on its head, and even then it would be a long shot, so the damage they're already taking significant. Flaming arrows being used. Plenty of Gondorians now on the front line, picking up the slack. Fountain Guard, Raven Helms, obviously the Wardens of the White Tower will be in there as well. The rigidity of the front line has been compromised now as well, with the Haven Guard and the Pharazim Swordmasters running roughshod in the backfield. I mean, the Belagair archers are shooting the Pharazim, but it's not going to be enough. I mean, at this point the Pharazim have taken enough damage to where the Champions of Nafrat and other supporting units will kill them, but the crossbows are gone. An Umbar General falls. We'll be seeing much more of that as we enter the battle's final stages. Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. Here are the Corsair fences, actually able to catch the veterans of Osgiliath out in the end with some throwing projectiles. Another general. That was Imrahil actually, so I don't know who the other general was. Must have been a Numenor one. Trying to use their throwing projectiles as well as they can into the Pelagia Marines and veterans of Osgiliath. I mean, at this point for Tundra's Fox, it'll just be a matter of getting as many kills as he can with this unit of fences. It is another battle, I suppose, but
only intervention by the Almighty Lord or a military genius can bring us victory from this disgrace.
by far the most healthiest fighting force on the battlefield in the end is going to be the Gondorians, by the looks of things.
Only half the enemy force remains.
I mean, they've pulled it back to 2%, I suppose, which is something. I think that's largely as a result of those crossbowmen and the hunting of them, resulting in some fairly hefty casualties for the attackers, but it's better than the alternative. Ravenhelms, and you can see now they're willing to actually ignore the archers and just charge into the rear of this front line and try and break it with the Pharazim swordmasters and the rest of the Gondorians, especially the Fountain Guard from the front. Looks like the Balaguer archers might be out of ammunition actually, so they're just going to be thrown in as a sort of last-ditch effort. One Numenorian shield guard. Anything back here? Nothing at all. Nope. Well, if there was a unit maybe of Castamir's Rangers that just suddenly decided to reveal themselves, maybe things wouldn't all be over, but I don't think we're going to be seeing such a twist on this occasion. Instead, Corsair Fencers winning this fight actually, even with the support of the Pelargian Marines, the veterans of Osgiliath, not having a great time in melee against the pokey swords of the Corsair Fencers, although to be fair, the Corsair Fencers were also able to get some volleys of their throwing projectiles off first to whittle both of these units down a little bit before engaging them in melee.
Run down those worthless peasants.
One of the enemy armies is gone. Could that be Dol Amroth maybe? 10 Pharazim Swordmasters right in and amongst things. Well, there's going to be a victory. It's going to be close though. Very close. So a sporting performance here. Moving into the late game by the defenders. Not going to quite be enough, but probably the longest battle I've shown in a while, and I'm glad to see it was a good one, because it's always rather disheartening when the longer battles turn out to be not all that great. But that was most certainly not the case on this occasion. Still victory seems certain. I mean, they are taking damage here in the Corsair Fencers, and they're having to fight uphill, which is going to tire them out more quickly. But both of the two units they're facing are not going to be really dealing the damage necessary, not going to be able to keep pace certainly with the kind of damage that the Corsair Fencers can deal. There goes another Umbar general. I think it's probably time for ×2 speed, because it's really just a case of, at this point, the Umbar units that are left are very, very resilient. Ravenhelm's going to try and get in and around so they can make quicker work, or are they? They're going to double back and deal with the Fencers, because the Fencers are winning after all on that front. So the addition of 65 Ravenhelms would be enough to tilt that fight back in favour of them. Yeah, 2% the difference in the end. That may tick over to 1.
Our army is tiring.
Ones of the White Tower chasing down the champions of Nafrat General, running for the hills. An inglorious end for the Harad General. Showing the enemy his back is probably what's going to be the order of the day. He's going to charge in there. He thinks better of it. He's going to die with his head held high. And there he goes. He was very wounded in all fairness. Lest they lose hearts. Pharazim. Corsair Fencers moving in. Horns of the White Tower. Significantly stronger unit than the veterans they were facing before, but they will still do a decent amount of damage with that armour piercing. Indeed, they actually are winning the fight. I mean, surely they will take losses at the hands of the Horns of the White Tower as well. This could be the end of the Gondorian general as well, which means everyone's general on the field will have fallen. Gondor, the sole owner of a general at this point. You can see here the benefits that armour piercing can have. Yeah, and they're just, basically, this is just one by one. I think they're going to send these units into the Corsair Fencers to see what ultimately breaks them. I mean, the Ravenhelms will do enough damage. I think that will be enough to finish them off, let alone the Fountain Guard with their phalanx. This will be enough to kill off the Gondor general though, so they are going to lose that. Knocked over and shanked. Balance of forces evenly matched. And the Warns of the White Tower seem to be turning this around. Of course, their fences could also rout, given the situation is what it is. It's a pretty good fight, though, between two units. Did it tick over to 1% in the end? It did. Something else the defenders can be proud of. Is the general himself going to have too many hit points for the Corsair fences to take care of? Maybe that will be the case. He's doing a good job. 3v3, very evenly matched here. Wouldn't it be funny if the Gondorians lost their general and then their army routed? Doesn't look like it, though. The general himself doing a good job. Onto the White Tower, gaining the upper hand now. 3v1, and it's a banner carrier, the general, and a standard warden of the White Tower. They're going to let the banner carrier slowly whittle this individual down, and there he goes.
Our enemies have snatched victory from us like thieves in the night.
Thieves?
Not be so lucky next time.
Interesting. Regardless, having a look at the results, very similar kills all round, really, from what you would expect, given the armies were what they were, very evenly matched, and yeah, just a very long, very satisfying siege to behold. And in the end, the forces of good, the old Numenor and what that stood for, able to overcome the dark, twisted version that it became later on. But yeah, let's see what did the damage for the Umbar armies. Harbingers of Castamere only committed later on, as were the Naru Sentinels, when the battle was really already lost, but they did their best. Corsair infantry actually early on doing quite well. As you would expect, Corsair crossbowmen proving to be a very key element of the Umbar army on this kind of battle. 215 kills for the Alcaron Legion, probably one that was committed earlier on against the very initial Dol Amroth attack, which seems like a lifetime ago at this point. Tundra's Fox's army, Corsair fencers. What did the Trebuchet do from his army? 158 kills, which, considering it got stuck, wasn't too bad. Repelling that sort of Gondorian flanking force was probably the most significant thing it did. Shield bearers doing okay. Corsair fencers, as well, as course, as we saw in the late game. We saw how potent they can be, even though the battle was already lost. They gave a fighting death. Corsair crossmen, once again, though, very much the most key unit that Umbar had in their arsenal was the Corsair crossbows. But yeah, in the end, it was kind of a slow battle that was based all around how tough they were, and Harad maybe not as used to that kind of warfare as the other factions on the field. Maybe that made a bit of a difference, but then again, I think everyone played well. I don't think there was much really else that could have been done. Maybe one of the key moments was the loss of those Demons of the Desert from Cad Bane's army. That was something which could be viewed on as a bit of a tragedy for the defenders, but again, there was stuff that both sides could have done better, and in the end the attackers just about shaded it and rightly won the battle, I think. So yeah, big thank you to Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Cloud for both making the additions to this map and sending me this battle replay. Big thank you to all of the players as well for being a part of the battle replay. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.